Today's training is going to focus on why your feedback isn't working and what's actually happening. Most feedback fails because something breaks in the system. It breaks in how the message moves from you to the recipient and then what happens next. And the problem is most leaders only look at one part of that. They focus on what they said. But feedback isn't just about the message. It's about who it's coming from, what's actually said, and how it's interpreted on the other side. And if any one of those breaks down, the feedback doesn't land and nothing changes. In this training, we're going to walk through 3 places where feedback typically breaks: the source, the message, and how it's interpreted on the other side. And you're going to start to see why, even though something feels really clear to you, it doesn't always translate into different behavior. And more importantly, you're going to understand exactly what you should be adjusting so that your feedback actually works to change behavior. So let's start by talking about feedback as a system and aligning on what the purpose of feedback actually is. So the problem is that most feedback doesn't fail because people don't care. It fails because something has broken in the system. And most leaders think that feedback fails because people don't care, they're not coachable, or they simply don't want to improve. And that's usually not what's happening. What's actually happening is that feedback is a system and it's breaking somewhere in that system. So today I'm going to give you a simple way to see where it breaks so that you can fix the right thing. Let's level set though. Let's level set and let's align on what feedback is actually meant to do. It is supposed to do one of 2 things: reinforce positive behavior or redirect behavior that is ineffective. And if it's not clearly doing one of those 2 things, it's not actually feedback. It's maybe commentary, maybe some noise. And the other thing that we really need to understand as leaders is that feedback at its core is meant to help people improve. It's meant to help the person receiving it. So before you provide feedback to anyone, personal or professional, ask yourself first, am I saying this to help the other person improve? And if the answer is yes, by all means, proceed with said feedback. If the answer is anything other than my goal is to help this person improve, then you need to take a beat, step back, and ask yourself what's actually happening here. Because sometimes as leaders, we may have a team member who does something that we are not a huge fan of, maybe in front of clients or in front of a large team meeting. And our immediate reaction is to say, I don't ever want that behavior to happen in public again, and I need to go talk to them right now and address this behavior. But if your goal is to protect yourself or to protect your team from showing up in a bad light, you're probably not in the emotional headspace to provide that feedback at that moment. So you need to take a minute, get your life together, get your thoughts together, and when you're finally in a place where the goal is to help the person improve and not to protect yourself, then you're ready to proceed with your feedback. Let's look at how the feedback system actually works. This right here is the full system. It's broken into 3 sections. You have the source, which is who it's coming from. You have the message, which is what is said. And then the interpretation, how is the person getting that, like how's it landing with them? What are they going to decide to do with the feedback? And how are they processing it? Most feedback conversations only focus on one of these 3 things, but failure can actually happen in any one of these 3 areas. And there's also a last piece down here that I kind of called out, the reinforcement piece. And as much as we'd like it not to be, this piece belongs to us as leaders if we are striving to be a good leader. You have got to keep an eye on whether or not the behavior changes after you have delivered the feedback. Is it changing long term? And if it's not, you've got to address it. And how many times have you heard or said, well, I don't know why the behavior isn't changing. I've already given them this feedback. Like, this is on them. I've already given them this feedback. I'm not saying it again. Well, here's the thing. You have a team that you are responsible for leading, for shepherding, for stewarding. This is the team that you are meant to lead, and leaders are responsible for their team members. That's the end game right there. You're responsible for them. Now, is it two-way? Do they play a role in it as well? Absolutely. But the onus really comes back to you as the leader to say, I've given this feedback, is it being applied? And if it's not being applied, where's the breakdown and what's the issue? Because behavior is trained. And we know that once we get into habits, even ourselves personally, it takes more than one comment on what we should change before that change actually starts to occur. So the people on your team, they need your reinforcement, they need your support, and that falls to you to ensure that you're holding up your end of the deal to keep them accountable. Again, it is two-way, but the onus does fall on you. So the source, trust. The first question the person is going to ask themselves, cognitively or subconsciously, is, do I trust who this feedback is coming from? So before people evaluate what you're saying to them, they're actually evaluating you. Do you know what you're talking about in their eyes? Are you for them or are you judging them? Have you been consistent in how you've led and how you've showed up across different projects? And if trust is low, especially with constructive feedback, it's going to get rejected before it's even considered. And this is why delayed feedback backfires and why only showing up when something is a problem is going to chip away at your credibility. Feedback is filtered through trust first, not logic. And I guarantee that every one of you who's watching this video, if you've ever received feedback from somebody that you didn't look up to, trust, admire, respect, what they say to you is not going to have as much weight as it coming from someone who you do trust and respect. So you got to think about that. The source, who it's coming from, is going to make an impact on how it's received. So that's what we call source failure. Strong feedback from the wrong source is going to get ignored. You can say the right thing, you can say it the right way, and it still won't land if you, as the source of feedback, is not trusted by that other person. Let's move on to the message. Is this clear enough to act on should always be our grounding question. How to frame your feedback is the space where most leadership advice lives, and most of it kind of oversimplifies things. Clarity isn't about saying or explaining more, it's about making the message actionable. Can the person see what you're referring to? Do they know what good looks like? Do they know what to do differently next time? If not, they're not going to stop working. They're going to continue on with their day. They're going to interpret what they think you meant. They're going to choose to either internalize it or reject it, and then they're going to keep it moving. So your message should always be anchored in, is this observable? Is it anchored to an expectation? And have I made it actionable? Those are the three pieces of your message that need to be present in however you phrase it. And if we have message failure, it means that people have had to interpret your feedback. And that means that you didn't give direction, you left them to figure it out. And now everyone is trying to solve for what is right and what does right look like on their own. And that is where inconsistency starts. Now you have everybody creating their own version of right and things start to go skirt off track. And it's not because people are careless, it's because they're being forced to fill in what's missing. And how they fill it in is rarely, if ever, consistent. It's going to be influenced by how someone's been trained, what they prioritize, what they think that you meant, or what's worked for them before. And even if everyone on your team is genuinely trying to do it right, if they're not working from the same definition over time, you're going to see that the gap between what you meant and what's being done widens and starts to get larger and larger and larger over time. And it's not from one big miss, it's from a series of small, slightly different interpretations over time. So interpretation, how is the person processing the feedback? This is the part that most leadership trainings completely miss, because two people can hear the exact same feedback and they can walk away with completely different outcomes. Why? Well, because feedback gets filtered. It gets filtered through three different things: orientation, identity, and capacity. So what does that actually mean? Orientation. Do I see this as helpful or do I see this as a threat? Identity. What does this mean about me and about how I'm seen? And through capacity. Do I even have the mental bandwidth to process this feedback right now? So even if the message is the same, what happens next isn't. because if it feels like a threat, the person's orientation is going to shift. If it challenges someone's identity, people are going to work to protect themselves. And if their capacity is low, it's not going to get processed. And at that point, feedback is being managed to protect how they see themselves, not to actually improve the work. So what happens after you say it? You're not just giving feedback, you're working against how it's being filtered by the person you're giving it to. And that filter is never going to be 100% neutral. And this is where most leaders misread what's happening. They assume that, okay, well, I said my feedback clearly, so it should land clearly. But by the time your feedback reaches the other person and they're trying to internalize it, it's already been shaped by all of the filters that we just talked about. It's shaped by how much they trust you, how safe they feel in that moment, right? How much psychological safety have you created on your team? By whatever your message might seem to imply about them, and whether or not they even have any room at that moment to process. And when you give that feedback, your main goal is for the person to hear it in the way that you intend. But if anything's off, the filter takes over. And once that happens, you're no longer correcting the work. Now you have to focus on how am I going to diffuse their reaction to this feedback. And then bringing back up the reinforcement piece, did it stick? Feedback is incomplete. It's not complete until behavior changes. If nothing changes, the feedback didn't work. And most of the time, we never go back and close that loop. We say it once, we assume it landed. Don't assume, verify, go back to the work, go back to observing those behaviors and check and see, have things actually changed? And if nothing did, something in the system broke. So the equation, this is crucial. This is absolutely crucial. Feedback is not additive, okay? Feedback is multiplicative. Yes, that is a tongue twister. If any part of the system is weak, the entire process falls apart. So the equation for feedback is if you want effective feedback, it is the source multiplied by the message multiplied by the interpretation. So let me explain the difference between additive thinking and multiplicative thinking. Additive thinking sounds like, well, I didn't say it perfectly, but they trust me, so it's fine. Or they were defensive, but I was really clear. Or, I don't have a strong relationship yet, but at least my feedback was super specific. In other words, we think that strengths in one area can make up for a weakness in the other. And that's how people want feedback to work. It would be great if feedback did work that way, but it doesn't. What actually happens is if two parts are strong and you have one weak link, that weak link pulls the outcome down because anything multiplied by 0 is 0. So as much as you want to look at it additively, you actually don't get to compensate. So if you have a strong message, but the person has low trust in you, the source, feedback is going to be rejected. If the person has strong trust in you as the source, but you've given an unclear message, now they're going to misapply your feedback. Or if everything is strong, but their interpretation of it is weak, it's going to get ignored. This is tricky, but you do need to have all three in order to have feedback that lands. You've got to have you as the source being trusted, the message being clear enough to act on, and the interpretation and how the other person processes it go through a filter where they actually receive the feedback that you have given. So checking your feedback. When feedback doesn't work, most leaders tend to gravitate towards, well, did I say it well enough? And that's the wrong question. Instead, you want to ask, did I have the credibility for it to land, right? Did I have enough credibility? Was it clear what they needed to change? And were they in a position to actually process it? This right here is how you diagnose the failure point and then use that data to adjust your approach moving forward. So as we talked about, feedback is not additive. It has to have all three of these because if any of these is missing, it's multiplied by 0 and anything multiplied by 0 is 0. So this is how you check after you provide that feedback. If nothing's working, and the behavior's not changing, go back and ask yourself these 3 questions, and whichever one or ones of them are out of place, adjust and then reapproach that situation. So what actually matters from today's training? If the feedback you're providing isn't changing anything, the fact that feedback is a system, and maybe you're missing one of those pieces, would be why. Most leaders think that feedback is only about what's said, and a lot of trainings focus on what to say and how to say it. But it's not just about that. Feedback is a system. It moves from the source, who it's coming from, to the message, what's actually said, to interpretation, what the other person does with it. And that last part is usually where it breaks, because people don't act on feedback, they act on what they think that it means. And if something isn't changing, it may not be a people problem, it is probably a breakdown somewhere in the system. Feedback isn't measured by what you say, but by what changes after. That's the quote I'm leaving you with today. And when things don't change, the answer is not simply say it better. It's, well, where might the system have broken? And if your feedback isn't leading to different outcomes, there is a breakdown somewhere in the system. And once you can see where it breaks, the source, the message, the interpretation, you can actually do something about it. In the next video, we're going to make this practical. We're going to cover what effective feedback actually sounds like when it's clear enough to act on. And this is the kind of work that we do here. Practical, clear, and focused on what actually changes performance. And if you're still with me, even if you're watching me on 2x speed, consider subscribing. New videos will be posted and released every single week. Thanks.